You know, there's so much synchronicity in life. I couldn't believe it, Rekha, when we're singing the first song of Please Forgive Me. Because one of the first stories that popped into my head this morning was, I was just a little tyke. I was maybe 5 or 6. And I lived on the farm. And so my grandparents lived with us. And all I can remember is we had this great big wooden oak table in the dining room, right? And I don't know why, but my grandmother was chasing me around that table with a broom. And I remember just crawling under that table and just giggling and laughing. So who knows what I did to deserve that, but it's a comedic moment in my life to rehearse that in my head. Please have a rose. And if you would too, when we finish the service, if there's someone that you can think of that you want to drive by, stop by, and give a rose to, please take another rose with you. It means so much sometimes to people who, if they don't have children or they're not around, just that someone else remembers them. So please do that. So the theme for this month is purpose. And what I've chosen is, my description is shining the light on purpose. So for me, on this Mother's Day, one of my purposes is to make sure that we understand where some things come from in our lives. And I wanted to share with you where Mother's Day actually comes from. The original version, it wasn't about all the Hallmark things that we see or the cards. It was about women empowering themselves. So Anna Jarvis, she founded the modern U.S. Mother's Day in 1908. That's how long we've been honoring our mothers. And she was inspired by her mother, who was Anne Reeves Jarvis, and she was a Civil War period peace activist. And she organized then what were called Mother's Day work clubs, and that was to improve sanitary conditions and lower infant mortality. So the heart of this celebration is about more than just our relationships. And after the war then, she even hosted Mother's Friendship Days. And that was for another reason, and I really like this. It was to promote the reconciliation between the Union and the Confederate soldiers. So our history is just rich with mothers making a difference. So Mother's Day, in its original intention, was a moral call to action. And that's why this fits with purpose. The call to action, it's not a sentimental gesture alone. So Julia Ward Howe was an abolitionist, and she's the author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. You might recall that. It was issued on Mother's Day as a proclamation in 1870, and a radical pacifist appeal for women to unite. And listen to this: demand an end to war. She urged mothers everywhere to rise up in the name of peace. And isn't that appropriate for us today? End war. And every one of us has an opportunity to influence the ending of war. And as we were talking about Mother's Day, I had to search my soul just a little bit, because I thought there really is even a higher purpose. And I came across a quote from Meister Eckhart where he said, "We birth the Christ no less than Mary. We are all called to be the mothers of God." That's what we live every day. We are the mothers of God. We protect and we share the spirituality of God. And that's a very high purpose in my mind. Now, in my life, in my childhood, at first one day I sat out on our front porch, and there was an old table that used to have a Singer sewing machine in it, if you remember. And so I played secretary in that, because I thought that's the only thing I could be at that time, right? I was born in 1952, so all the images of women at that time were just secretaries, right? But for some reason, God just came into me and said, no, Colleen, you're just going to be more than that. So I told my dad one day, I said, I want to be a singer. And so I sang the Star Spangled Banner for him. And he said, Colleen, I think you need to choose another song. Because that requires soprano, and I barely am alto. And I said, okay. And so he saved me from embarrassing myself in show and tell the next day, thank goodness, right? And then another day I said to him, Dad, I want to be a politician. And he said, well, Colleen, you would have to sacrifice some of your beliefs in order to be a politician. He said, you have to serve others, and they give you demands. And I thought, okay. But then I decided, okay, let me get into politics. So then I became a speechwriter for Minnesota politicians. And I would write these glorious speeches, right? All about liberty, faith, everything, right? And when I first started the profession, the politicians would come back and they'd say, I can't make that commitment. And so what my dad told me came to be true. I was writing and feeling commitments, but that isn't what politicians were doing. So my purpose changed in life. Then I said, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. Oh no, maybe I want to be a scientist. Well, I didn't end up doing either one of those because I fell in love and got married. So I was accepted to law school, but then I didn't go. Then I started working. In my job, I became a purchasing agent in a company where I worked with scientists and I worked with contracts. And I became a well-known specialist in government contracting in working with engineers. I worked every Mars mission up until we had some of the most recent ones after I retired. So you see, purpose in life changes all the time, right? And there were other people that had a purpose in life. So let's take Martin Luther King. All he wanted to do was work on trains. He wanted to be a train engineer. He never wanted to be a preacher and go out and be in civil rights. Even when he marched, in the march that he marched in, it was by accident. He showed up because someone else was late, so then he had to march. So you see, what happens to us in life is that what we do sometimes is a higher calling and shifts our purpose. And if you think about Einstein wanted to play violin. He wasn't thinking about anything else except for music because it stimulated him. But then he realized that when he was performing music, he was an excellent physicist and an excellent mathematician. And isn't that what music is all about? It's the rhythm. It's getting deeper. And then you have Martha Stewart, right? Well, Martha Stewart started as being a model. But in her heart, when she was at home, all she was doing was planting plants and working in the kitchen. And look at what that purpose did for her. Now there's another person who I think you might know, but let me share the life that she led. So her name is Stephanie Yamamata. And she was born in 1986. So here's a recent one, okay? And she was bullied through school. Matter of fact, she was called the germ. She was labeled as weird, and she was an outsider. But somehow, there was a light in her. And later, she was even sexually abused, and she suffered from PTSD. So she didn't have a very good start. But she had the power of God. And she had that power to become what we know now as Lady Gaga. What a performer. What a spirit. And she is one of the greatest contributors to the LGBTQ community. And she helps all kinds of marginalized groups. And you see, it isn't just about famous people that find their purpose. It's about us. We find our purpose. And I thought there was a great thing that I accidentally heard this morning when the Buddha was talking and said, you know what? Every day is yours. So that means every day we can live our purpose. But what happens to us, right? Our minds start working like a bunch of monkeys hanging out in the trees in the jungle, right? It goes. I got to do this, I got to get the groceries, I got to clean the house, I got to take the kids here, I have to drive there, I got another appointment, I got a doctor's appointment, and then I got to get... And that's what happens to us sometimes. And that kind of takes us over, right? We're into that doing mode, but that's not the being mode. And the being mode is where we serve our purpose. So the recommendation from the Buddha was, in the morning, instead of just jumping out of bed, just kind of swing your legs over the bed and just sit there for a moment. Take in deep breaths. Remember life and smile. And just celebrate another day. That's how we get back to serving and to being within our purpose. There's a quote that I read by A. Ann, and she said, just as clouds cannot affect the power of the sun's light, your inner goodness cannot be diminished. As long as your heart is beating, you are purpose. With every breath we take, we are purpose. Our purpose to sing. My purpose in life is to serve. I learned that as a kid because my mom always called me Sunshine, and that's then what my brother and sister started calling me, and my dad started calling me was Sunshine. So in taking on that title, I realized I can be the light. I can be sunshine. And I watched my mom, my lovely mom, the one who would milk cows at 5 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock at night. And then she would always take time during the day, and she would go visit some of the senior women who could not leave their homes. And she would give them eggs. So I was raised in that. And so I like that. I saw how good my mom felt for that. And when I went with her, and I dutifully there, I sat and I behaved and I listened to the conversations. And I learned so much wisdom. That's what God is, right? Wisdom. And I started learning that when I was just 6 years old, through example and through listening. And that's what we all are for someone else. Remember, our purpose is to shine the light, like we talked today. What we sang, that you are light, I am light, see the light, that is what our lives are about. And it all ties to the principles of unity. We have to remember that we're here for 5 good principles. We're here because God is everywhere and always present in every circumstance. The divine energy underlines and animates all of our existence. And share that. Be proud of it. Know that we serve each other. We serve the divine. The divine lives through us. So let's make it a good life. You know I love stories. So I have to tell you another story. Because I thought this one was so good and so apropos. So there was a water bearer in India. And you know how they carry water, right? There's a big stick that's over your shoulders, and there's a bucket that hangs on each end. Okay? So this water carrier in India would go and fill his buckets, and then he would go walking down the trail, and he would take it to his master. But there was a bit of an issue, because one bucket always, when he got there, was full, but the other bucket was only half full, because the bucket had a crack. But this went on for 2 years, that always he got there with one full bucket, and 1/2 bucket. But as he was on that walk one morning, all of a sudden, the bucket with a crack just said, "I'm so ashamed. I'm so ashamed. Here you go, you fill me up. But by the time we get there to deliver to the master, I'm half empty. I'm just ashamed because I'm not doing my part." And then the carrier looked at the bucket and said, "Now don't be ashamed. Be proud that you are delivering to the master." He said, but you would be so much more successful if I didn't have a crack. But he looked back at him and he said, "Let me share something with you. Did you notice that as we walk, on one side of the road there are all these flowers?" He said, "Oh no." He said, "Well, did you know that I go along and I put seeds on that side of the road as we walk?" "No, I didn't know that." He says, "Well, this is wonderful what you do. You are the one that's providing all the water for those seeds as we walk along." And he said, "Those are the flowers that I cut and I make beautiful bouquets and I give them to the master. And the master loves those bouquets." He goes, "Oh, I didn't know that." So, what's the moral of that story? We're all cracked pots. And those cracks, those little flaws, those are what someone else is appreciating. Have you ever had someone you tripped and they started laughing? They needed that laughter that day, right? It's all about being ourselves no matter what we have for cracks or flaws. So that is what, when we don't even know it sometimes, we're fulfilling a purpose. And that purpose changes all the time. I went to the movie Michael a week ago. And here I am, I'm in the restroom, and I'm looking at my cell phone because I've got the tickets on my phone, but my girlfriend, she hasn't made it yet. My friend's not there, which is typical for her. She's always late. But I'm just kind of fussing over this, right? And I hear this voice go, "Can you help me?" It was very delicate, and I turned, and there was standing this blind woman. Now, my mind didn't do the right thing, okay? I'm going, "You're blind, why are you going to movies?" Talk about being short-sighted. Michael's all music and words. There was nothing that wasn't going to be enjoyed by her too, but I didn't think that way. So, whatever flaws we might have, or differences that we might have, or things that we're missing, they all contribute to the richness of not just our lives, but someone else's life. And that's what we need to remember each day. So Jesus always gives us great teachings, right? And I just needed to share with you a teaching. This comes from Matthew 6:22. Spirit will mold our purposes when we allow it to do so. Allow it to do so. What is the unity principle for us here? Well, God is everywhere and always present in every circumstance for us. This divine energy is what underlies and animates all of our existence. So, how are we going to find our purpose? How are we going to think about that every day? Well, we're going to apply a unity principle. We are going to apply the principle of prayer and meditation because we can connect and align us to our own spiritual nature within God. So that's the assignment that I'm giving you today. For you to welcome, to emphasize that principle as you carry out your days. For in this prayer and meditation time, you will see, you will feel, you will be your purpose. And that's what we're looking for in life, right? Cracks and all. We've got a lot to give. And a lot of joy and love and peace will flow from us. So with that, I give great gratitude. And I close by saying, Namaste. I see the light of God in you.